Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. You are at a session called Culture Shock, and what we're going to be talking about today is the devastating impact that COVID-19 has had on cultural industries around the world. We are going to focus a little bit on the impact and a lot on the solutions and some of the things that we can do, we, the Davos community, and we, the world, can do to help revive these industries more quickly, given the importance they have on our communities, on our community resilience, on social cohesion, on our lives. My name is Jeanne Bourgault. I am the president of Internews and your moderator today. My organization, in essence, really supports storytellers around the world. And so this topic is really personal to me. And so I'm very grateful to our panel for engaging with us. And let me introduce the panel here. First is Mayor Anna. She gave me permission not to try to pronounce her last name, which I'm very grateful for. The mayor of Stockholm since 2018. Next over is Amr Al-Madani. I knew I was going to get it wrong. CEO of the Royal Commission for Al-Ula, which is dedicated to protecting the site's cultural, historic, natural, and archaeological value. We're very excited to have you here. And Platon, someone I've shared a panel with before, Peabody Award-winning photographer, and the founder of the nonprofit, The People's Portfolio.
Hi.
Glad to have everyone here today. Thank you. This is a live-streamed session, and so if you are engaging on social media, please use the hashtag WEF22. And I'm just going to start with a few words of context and then go into questions. I do want you all to know that I will turn to the audience for questions, so we really are eager to hear from you, your ideas and thoughts and questions as well. I think the context is fairly straightforward. COVID-19 hit the cultural industries very, 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 very hard. It's fairly obvious. Many of the arts and cultural industries are venue-based. Museums and galleries and festivals and ballet and all of the different types of things that were just so clearly not going to be able to stand up to social distancing or lockdowns. But the arts industries and the cultural industries were also hit by all the other effects of COVID, the fear, the uncertainty for the business models, the layoffs. It was just sort of a double whammy, I would say, that would hit these industries. In early 2020, the Brookings Institution looked at what was happening to the cultural industries in the United States and estimated that $150 billion in sales would be lost due to the pandemic and over 2.7 million jobs. And I think this was in 2020 alone. That's a third of the industries. Hits of this magnitude hit all over the world. COVID has been devastating, an existential threat and blow to the arts and cultural communities. And yet, when you have such a giant blow, it does change things, right? It opens up some inspiration. There are new players, there are new artists, there are new approaches, there are new platforms. Lots of change and disruptive change has happened. And yet, I think we all feel it as well. This pandemic has brought our own personal need for deeper connection to culture. We all feel that all the more, and so that is a positive thing. And I think this panel will bring some of that hope and optimism. That's what happens in Davos. You look at a challenge and you say, hey, let's look at it differently. But we'll start out first question, sort of what the impact felt like in an actual community or in Stockholm. Anna, how did you see the collapse in the industry? How did it play out? And how did it affect your community, your constituency?
So of course, I mean, there was a shock for the culture sector and all the industry, and we had several meetings with theaters, with artists, galleries, and so on, and they were shut down. The audience wasn't there, of course, and some activities went online, but there was no streaming services that also make revenues. So of course, a lot of jobs disappeared, a lot of competence as well disappeared. And the city was not a city anymore. It was something else, an empty place. And I feel that we all felt that a city is much more than just opportunities to jobs or for education. It's also a place to meet, a place to have experience with others. And I mean, digital experience is not the same as sitting next to other people and watching and having the same kind of experience live. So we really felt for the business, and of course that was salaries was one, really huge cost, but many people in the culture sector in our cities are self-employed, so it was not such a huge problem, but though rent was. So what we did that the actors didn't have to pay rent, of course, and all the real estate companies also realized that and tried to help, but of course the small property owners, they just saw the revenues. So that was the biggest problem as well. They couldn't pay the rent, so they couldn't be active anymore. So we saw all these like transforming the city in a negative way. And now for us the lesson is like how the importance of culture in our cities to be attractive for talent, for inhabitants, but also for people to meet. Because after the post-pandemic city discussion, everyone is, the 15-minute city is great, let's build on that, service close by. But the problem with the 15-minute city is that people are in their different district and not meeting up. And that's why I think the central part of the city is crucial. So we need to have plans for the downtown area for where culture and creativity meet, because then people from different backgrounds also meet. Of course we should have culture everywhere, that's not what I'm saying, but we need it more also in the specific central, really attractive areas. But I have to say that we measured the life quality of our citizens, and it declined because of the lack of culture during the pandemic. So you could really see that this is not seen as cost anymore, it's investments. Investments in culture and creativity and the community there is actually as important as infrastructure or real estates. You have to see it like the backbone of our cities for the future.
Can I just have a follow-up question? You measured that. How did you go about measuring? What was that measurement like?
Yeah, so we had data coming in from one of our departments in our city. We asked, how is the pandemic has influenced you? Of course, social isolation is one thing, but also that they couldn't take part of cultural activities really declined their life quality, and then we can use it now for investment in culture, but I can talk about that later, but it's a crucial part of the city. A city without culture, a city without artists, creative people, is not a livable city. So if we want to be competitive for the future, we need to bring it in. So I think that we have opportunity now, better than before, I would say.
Right, and appreciation. But I'd love to turn to you sort of to bring that artist perspective and and we're sort of saying how important it is to a community, how important arts and culture are to a city. What is the power of the artists themselves, and how important are they to sort of our lives?
I mean, artists have always struggled. It's in the nature of how it works. We always use our emotions to put it out to the world. If you think there's a great history of society not properly supporting artists, and it's kind of like holding back the sea. You can't really hold back creativity. We've always provided a window to society or a mirror to society. Right now, everyone's talking about Putin and Russia. I had the experience of photographing Putin, and I have a very unique perspective of what it was like to meet him. And so sometimes an artist brings something to the table that perhaps a journalist might not, certainly a historian might not. Certainly, other people who would interview him. So I'd like to just tell you a little bit about what happened there, because it's interesting from an artistic point of view. So it was a very dramatic experience, being sent to his private dacha just outside Moscow, and guns everywhere, snipers on the roof. I was led into his office, which is, I believe, where they partly dissolved the Soviet Union back in the day, and now it's his office. So the door opens, and he walks in the room with a giant entourage, 2 translators whispering in his ear, a whole gang of bodyguards, and a whole load of political advisors. And I said to him, Mr. President, I'm an artist, so I'd like to ask you something before I document this moment of history as an artist. And I said, I was brought up by my mum and dad listening to the music of the Beatles. And I'm interested to know if you ever listened to the Beatles. They translate in his ear. There's some confusing looks amongst the entourage. And then his mood drops and he orders all the advisors and the 2 translators out of the room immediately. And he turns to me and in perfect English he says, "I love the Beatles." I said, "I didn't know you spoke English." He said, "I speak perfect English." So I said, "That's interesting. In that case, let's talk about art. Let's talk about who your favorite Beatle is." He said, "Paul." So I said, "What's your favorite song? Is it Back in the USSR?" Yeah, he didn't like that very much. And then he seemed to get even more angry and he said, "No, my favorite song is Yesterday. Think about it." And I thought about it.
Oh my God.
And I realized I'm being sent a subliminal message about the old days of power and authority of the Soviet Union through a Paul McCartney song. Now that artistic connection I had talking about culture with him allowed me in. I'd like my friend to show the picture. I ended up 1.5 inches away from his nose as I took this picture. I could feel his cold breath on my hand as I focused the lens. And that's how I got the truth. The truth is that this is the face of power and authority in Russia. And then if you go to the next picture, and then he performs power for me in his chair. Now, the headshot, if you go back one, the headshot, he loved this picture because it shows him as a tough nationalist that he wants to be. But I'm very honored and privileged to tell you that the LGBTQ community in Russia and the human rights community in Russia, they're all my friends. And they have also adopted this picture because they use it as a banner to show everything that they believe is wrong with power and authority in Russia. And I've been notified recently that anyone who is caught circulating this picture with photoshopped rouge on or any kind of artistic street art additions, which I personally love, if anyone's caught circulating online with connection with human rights, they will instantly go to jail. So this picture has now been labeled as extremist material. So it's interesting how culture does build bridges. And, you know, us artists, we see the world in a different place, in a different way. If I had spoken to him as a journalist, I would never have even got the picture, let alone had an insight into his mind. If you think about the words, yesterday, all my troubles seem so far away. Now it looks as though they're here to stay. Oh, I believe in yesterday. And he's taking himself out of it and putting Russia into that song. So, and then the other thing I learned is that he's not to be underestimated, because the narrative right now is that he's gone mad. But I suspect the Putin that I met is a strategist. And it was extraordinary, all the politicians I've worked with over 30 years. I've never had a philosophical, symbolic conversation using Beatles lyrics to express secretly what they might feel. He's super smart. And unfortunately, he's not to be underestimated. There is a lot of strategy in his thinking, and he understands how the West think very, very carefully, even through culture. So that's how an artist sees the world. Taking
very much the direct impact of culture on our current crises and turning it to looking a little bit more historical. You're looking at cultural preservation. Talk to us a little bit about the project, and then also it has the double impact of cultural preservation and economic development, right? So talk to us about the three of those linkages as well.
Thank you very much. Well, to me, really, culture is a manifestation of who we are as a society. I think if we use the expansive definition of culture, it's really an ever-evolving interpretation of where we have been and who we have been and where we intend to be. And that's very pivotal in new developments when you are working with a UNESCO heritage site, a capital of many old ancient civilizations that sits on thousands of years incense road. That has been a culture capital of the world with more than 16 languages inscribed. I mean, you're looking now at an architecture manifestation really where the columns are inspired by Roman architecture. But also the motifs are by Egyptian pharaohs culture and carved by a local Nabataean from Al-Ula. So to us in Al-Ula, which is one of the cultural and natural wonders of the world now in North Saudi Arabia, we've adapted a concept we call cultural landscape, which comes at the interplay between human being and nature. Because the climate change and debate about sustainability always puts culture or human and nature at different side of the equation. Humans are nothing but part of nature. So if we can structure our development plans in Al-Ula, as we realize this to become a living museum for the world, and make sure that the human activities, the culture footprint of human, does nothing but enhance the natural context, we would create the bedrock of sustainable development. And to date, it has been impressively received around the world, because we are taking all of that into our master plans, building code, densities, tourism program, and it's been very successful to date.
That says it blends the different players involved with maintaining cultural identity, cultural history. I'd love to we'll do another quick round of questions and go to you, Anna. Sort of what types of influences are you working with to stimulate a quicker recovery of these important industries, particularly as their private sector involvement, as we often hear about public-private partnerships and things to help stimulate. How's this working in Stockholm?
We have downtown streets empty, and the businesses is gone, or the shops closed down, and the real estate owners together with the city now makes it possible to have galleries or short rent leases for a shorter period of time, but makes it much more flexible. So we talk a lot about repurposing buildings. So a place where it used to be a shop or a grocery store or something could actually be a gallery, and we see that, in fact. Now it's attracting other new people into the city. So that's one thing that we want to collaborate even more. Another thing is that the outdoor environment is much more important for citizens after the pandemic. We actually, public parks, green areas, but also art outside. So together with the real estate agency and the city, we launched the biggest outdoor exhibition in Europe, taking place this year with over 200 artists, and we build it with a neighborhood perspective. So they will be involved in every neighborhood to build on the place identity. And the policymakers should not be, influencing. It's actually just the citizens. And it could be mural paintings, it could be statues, it could be other form of artwork, and also for the citizen to find out new places. Because thanks to the pandemic, people stayed in their cities and experienced new public places that I haven't seen before. And we have so many hidden gems, and together with artists we can make also the citizens experience that in a new way. So just one out of many examples, but how we really try to interact and integrate culture in everything we do from now and for the future. And we also did a data measurement we compared ourselves, because I think that also is very important to see, every city thinks that they are great, but how is it really? So we compared us with New York and Tokyo and London and other cities, and we could see that we have problem because it's too expensive in our cities. So the next generation artists have troubles finding places to exhibit and so on. So that's something now we're discussing. How can we make it more livable and lower the barriers for next generation artists? So just a few examples how we really work for the future. Yeah.
There's a similar question for you, sort of private industry, how have they come in and helped your efforts, or sort of where are you seeing some innovative partnerships that are moving more quickly for your goals?
Thank you. I think that although that people are challenging now the whole idea of which we celebrated for many decades of globalization working together into more nationalistic agendas, there's no way we can face such pandemics alone. Partnerships are essential, and I think it's all about setting the right incentives in place. Nobody wants to fail, and nobody wants to react to such pandemics again with that level of collapse in the culture sector. We have established multiple partnerships now with private sectors. You have to set the right incentives in the game in order to increase chance for occupancy, for operators, enablement to have art galleries being subsidized in order to sustain their presence for the long term. We're working for education and health by ensuring some capacity guarantees for hospitals and private operators who came very hopeful that our trajectory led by Vision 2030, that we're going to go all up, and now we're seeing confluence of many challenges globally. Partnerships don't come as solutions only. I think the best use of partnerships is to redefine problems. Sometimes we're all hung on the problem defined tens of years ago. Technology, sense of growth, scale, and youth give us opportunities to listen to the problems redefined. For example, our model relies on travels from inbound from outside our boundaries, and then we discover that the locals are one of the most interesting consumers of culture, that if we pivot our marketing and engage them, they will discover their own cities. What do they do when they discover their own cities? They call their relatives. What happens when you have an 85% of your land nature reserves? It becomes a haven to run from COVID-19, strict rules and confinement. All of these definitions come because new partners see our problems differently.
Yeah, great point. Latan, we've heard a couple of examples of things that are working. Be curious for you to sort of reflect more broadly on sort of a call to action to all of us. We all have different roles that we can play in helping revive and sustain the cultural industry. So your thoughts?
My friend here mentioned a magical word, which is partnerships. And artists, there's a tradition of exchanging ideas and bonding together. Artists also offer society provocation sometimes. So the Putin picture which I showed, online I saw an amazing demonstration by Pussy Riot. You may have heard of them. They burnt my portrait of Putin, which I thought was amazing. So I got in touch with them, and we became very good friends. So I invited them to my studio, and I'd like you to show you the first picture I did of Pussy Riot. So you probably know them as the hardcore feminist punk rock group who spoke truth to power against Putin's nationalism. And consequently, they were put in 2 years Siberian prison. But what happens when we remove those aggressive, colourful masks? If you show the next picture I took of them, you see something different. You see, this is Nadia and Masha after they were released from prison, and you see the vulnerability on their face and the price they paid for their support of women's rights and human rights around the world, LGBTQ rights in particular. So during their trial, as artists, they were put, before they went to prison, they were in the courtroom put in a metal cage as if they're wild animals. And Nadia, the woman with dark hair, the co-founder of Pussy Riot, she was constantly scribbling thoughts on a scrappy piece of paper. Towards the end of the trial, the judge asked her to stand up and make a closing statement before sentencing. And I'm sure Nadia must have known she's about to go to jail. Nevertheless, she stood up, nervously clutching her piece of paper, took a deep breath and read out from her notes. And what I believe she read out will go down as one of our generation's greatest speeches as an artist. And if I may, I'd like to read you one line from her speech. I've got it here. She said, "I wouldn't give people labels. There are no winners or losers here, injured parties or accused. We just need to make contact, to establish a dialogue and a joint search for truth, to seek wisdom together, to be philosophers together, rather than stigmatizing and labeling people. That is one of the worst things people can do." Nadia believes one of the worst things we could do in society is to judge each other. And she thinks, as an artist, that we should be more curious and less judgmental. So they went to prison, but for an artist, especially a young woman, to reach out with the open hand of friendship, even to her oppressors, and say, we still need to talk and figure this out, shows extraordinary courage, extraordinary strength, and curiosity about society. So we have a tradition of being pushed down, but there is also a tradition when you're pushed down, something extraordinary happens to people who have been pushed down in society. It's like uncorking the bottle of champagne when they rise up, because they're the ones that speak the truth. So I'm very proud not only to be an artist, but to see the world through an artist's eyes, and in this case to collaborate with extraordinary, brave, artistic people who really do show the world the challenges we face right now.
Thank you. I will turn to the audience. We have just a couple minutes left, but just love to hear your questions or comments to our incredible panel here. Anybody? Please.
Hi,
yes.
my name is Jeanne. I come from the United Arab Emirates. And I vice chair the UAE Gender Balance Council. So my question would be regarding a woman, if you don't mind. I know that during the crisis that caused unprecedented job losses, and women, maybe it hit women the hardest. I would like to know the impact of such crisis on female artists, whether it's losing their jobs or stopping actually their art from being displayed to the public. I would like to know if there were any initiatives on a governmental level or policies that were made to really protect female artists. Thank you.
Such an important question. I'll turn each of you have a different perspective on that. Anybody want to specifically jump in?
Just a short comment from my city. We didn't close the schools during the pandemic, and I think that was a crucial factor for keeping the jobs for the women, because we can see that, I know it's controversial, but I think that really think twice during a pandemic if you need to shut down the schools, because what you can see is also often there was the women, even though you were artist or if you just had another job in another sector that was at home and had to quit their jobs. And these effects we will have to live for a long time, of course. So my suggestion is like keep the schools open as much as possible. But that is not the answer. But when it comes to artists and so on, we have strategies, of course, also for them. But I think that managed better in our city than in others where the schools were closed. Yeah.
Other comments?
Thank you. So thank you very much. I think if we all accept the fact that culture is very essential for the growth of societies in a healthy manner, then creators and curators, whether artists, museum, developers, fashion, culinary artists as well, they're essential, and their contribution to the economy and the healthiness of the growth is, to me, as important as infrastructure and assets. I think these are the drivers of the past. During the pandemic, we believe that the loss of any creator in the large scheme of culture brokers, specifically women as well, wasn't acceptable. Actually, through the pandemic, we managed to run some of our most successful engagement with artists was a program we ran called Desert X Al-Ula, which was partnered with California-based organization, and we brought artists from all over the world, half of them were women, to interpret our cultural landscape with creations. We also hosted What Lies Within, which was an art collection by Basma Suleiman in order to celebrate young and emerging artists. And you know what? Artists are resilient because they're not doing this for luxury. It's profound to them. So once you open a small window of catalyst, they leverage, they come, they produce. And I think for those who are in the investment world, your capital with the artists and creatives will always have much higher return than your capital invested anywhere else, long term.
I appreciate that. We are at time, so quick one, I'll let you go very quickly, please.
Yeah, so I'm a founder of Capital Art, which is focused on ensuring that artworks from every geography are fairly valued and on the global art market to ensure inclusion. I was wondering what your views are on the fact that, yes, during the lockdown, obviously everybody in the arts loves the in-person engagement, but the fact that the digital engagements allowed people from wider regions and around the world to access the arts, do you think that that's something which actually did present an opportunity both for people to experience your art, but also for the artists in terms of just broadening their market, in terms of people interested in their artwork?
We've got 10 seconds. Platan, do you want to answer that quickly about how your art changed?
Artists always are fascinated by technology. And so we adapt really, really quickly. Art is like water. It can fit into any vessel. So when you're faced with a challenge, it's the artists often who think, how can we move around this or embrace it? So I've been even collaborating with Pussy Riot on some really cool digital new art pieces based on the iris and using some of those words that Nadia read out as her speech. So it's a call to action to society, especially young women. The lady behind you talked about women being oppressed in society, especially in the arts. There's a long tradition of that women always get hit first whenever there's a crisis in the world. So, you know, it's the artists that can help amplify the important voices in society. So I think it's a time for not just art to be celebrated for art's sake, but to think of art and culture as a service to society, and to see how can we help in a time of crisis heal and bring people back together, because we have become so divided and there are so many powerful forces pulling us apart. So the art community, the culture community needs to step up and feel as empowered and motivated to bring people back together. And art has always done that. So we are resilient. We need as much help as we can get. We value the support we get from institutions and governments, but we're going to do it anyway. And watch out.
We'll leave on that note. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us today. Appreciate it.